Here with a book today. The professor has a book for you to look at. It's called The Kama Sutra.
Ooh.
Everybody knows the Kama Sutra.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
I don't know how many of you have ever read it, but here's a copy of it. And the reason I have it is because I'm going to refer to what was supposed to have been a quote from it by the Bill Murray character in the movie Scrooged. He says, says in here that there's a place where you can touch a woman that will make her bark like a dog.
Nope. Nope.
Woof! Woof! Woof!
Oh, yes.
Or behind the ear, maybe.
Don't make my back leg go. There you go. Got the right spot.
Well, of course, that quote is not in this book.
We are the sexagenarian sages.
And we are here to bust the myths of sex and aging.
And today we're going to talk about the erogenous zones. Something else I'm sure many people have heard of. Maybe they understand it, maybe they don't.
That's kind of what Bill Murray was looking for.
Yep, just that magic place that you can touch to turn your partner on. So what is an erogenous zone?
Should we be academic at first?
Let me adjust my glasses. Actually, let's look at the genus of the word erogenous.
The etymology?
The
Etymology.
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 Yes.
We're going to look at the etymology of the word.
And actually, I'm going to look and say that it was first used in 1889, the word erogenous. And it was first attested to in 1905.
Okay.
But the origin is actually from two Greek words.
Eros,
Eros meaning
sexual love.
and genus meaning producing. So we have erogenous, producing sexual love.
Sexual pleasure. Maybe sexual desire.
Sounds yummy to me. Maybe turning yourself on or turning your partner on.
Yeah.
So an erogenous zone, it's an area of the body of the heightened pleasure. There may be more nerve endings there. And there are, when people think of erogenous zones, they often think of what are called the primary erogenous zones, the obvious ones, the lips, the breasts, the genitals.
I can't touch those here on YouTube.
That's why I'm only kind of putting my hands sort of in front of more or less. How about the anus? That can be a primary erogenous zone.
And the perineum.
And that's the ones that many people are familiar with.
So you can ask yourself this question. Do the erogenous zones exist? Well, experiment and find out on your own body.
Yes.
Or on the body of
Your
partner.
lover. I'm going to go back to the blueprints for a moment. We've talked about the erotic blueprints in other videos. There are certain blueprints that if you go straight for those primary erogenous zones, the genitals, for example, it might actually shut them down.
Boom.
It's just too much, too fast.
Overwhelming.
However, they may touch on what's called the secondary erogenous zones. One of those is the neck. What about just a nice light touch along the neck?
Or maybe even the throat.
May I touch your ears?
You may.
So perhaps along the curve of the ear, or a light tug on the earlobe, the inner arm, or the inner thigh. How about some others?
Well, there's the armpits.
Yep.
The navel. The fingertips. I remember the episode of the original Star Trek where I believe it was called the Enterprise incident, where Spock is being intimate with the Romulan commander.
Oh, yeah.
And it's their fingertips that they are touching and rubbing. There's also, of course, the chest, not necessarily the nipples, but the chest, pressure on it, for instance. That's something I really like. Or how about the toes or the feet? Now, there can even be more if you get into, let's say, the kinky blueprint. Maybe
Pulling the hair.
pulling the hair.
May I?
Yes.
And there's an art to pulling the hair, so it feels good, not painful.
Hands around the throat
Mm.
can be another one.
Mhm. Once again, done in the right way that turns the person on, and done with a consciousness of how much pain you're causing them.
Discomfort.
We want turn on, not discomfort.
And so you get consent. And maybe it's something you already know about your partner. You've already discussed it. You've already arranged for consent around it so that you know that at certain times, these various touches will be welcome.
We referred to this a little bit earlier, is how do you know where your erogenous zones are? What kind of touch, what areas? You experiment with it, with yourself and your partner. A couple of years ago, I was experimenting with my own erogenous zones, and I discovered that the area between my breasts, not my nipples, but between my breasts, a very light touch can be highly arousing for me. I was in my late 50s and I'm just discovering that. And it was because I took the time to really explore my body and find out what felt good and then communicate that to you. We have another practice, a little more scientific, shall we say, practice that we've done to discover our erogenous zones. And that's called body mapping. Would you like to explain body mapping?
Well, body mapping is an experiment of where either on your own body or on the body of your partner, with consent, you discover those spots. You spend time to find out what feels good and what doesn't, what feels better than another spot. You may use a number system such that, may I touch your face?
Yes, you may.
Tell me, is that a 1, meaning, it doesn't really feel all that good, all the way somewhere between that and a 5, meaning that it feels absolutely wonderful? How would you number that?
I would call that a 4.
And you can do that on other body parts to begin to map the kinds of touch on what areas of the body are preferred by your partner.
You said what areas feel good. I want to break it down even further than that, because there's good that's arousing and there's good that's comforting. So for me, for example, very light touch is arousing. Deeper, heavier touch, like you would get in a massage, is very comforting to me. 2 touches with very different effects. So if I'm looking for arousal, I may ask you to do light touch. If I'm looking for comfort, I may ask for the deeper touch. And that can also change during the course of a session. So for example, I may want the arousal at the beginning of a session, but after I've climaxed, the more comforting, deeper touch may be what I'm looking for. And part of that's communicating that to you in a way that isn't about you're doing it wrong. It's about this is the touch I desire at this point in time. Because that's one of the mistakes I made early in our relationship, is when I was not getting the touch I wanted, I came across pretty harsh.
It was more negative rather than guiding.
Yes. And we've learned, and one of the ways I do it is, you know what would feel even more delicious was if you touched me this way. And how does that land versus, don't do that.
Or that doesn't feel good.
Yep.
I don't like that.
It's something we had to learn.
Yeah. It's a practice.
Yep. Okay, so we've covered primary and secondary erogenous zones. We've talked about how you can discover them on yourself and with your partner. And another way of learning about this can actually be working with a coach who can guide you in touching yourself or touching your partner. And that comes in particularly handy with the body mapping. And if you want to get really geeky, you set up a spreadsheet.
Yep.
And you set up different areas of the body, different types of touch, and rate them on the 1 to 5 scale if you want to get really geeky about it.
And we can create sex labs for our clients to help them go through this procedure in a guided way that will feel good to both parties and result in a good understanding of what really feels good and or what feels arousing to each of them.
And one of the ways you can use this is if you're in a situation where you want to, I'm going to use kind of a loaded word, seduce your partner. Seduction isn't about convincing somebody else about doing something. It's about arranging the environment where they may be amenable to doing something.
Where they feel safe and they feel more open to trying something.
So creating turn-ons, basically, in a consensual way.
Yep. And that's what the erogenous zones are all about.
So for example, we talked about going directly to the primary zones may be triggering for some people.
For some.
Oh, for some, they love it.
That may be exactly what they want because they have a sexual blueprint.
But for me, I need a little more indirect. So having you come up and grab my breasts would be a turnoff for me. I would probably retract. Having you come up behind me and brush my hair aside and kiss the back of my neck or stroke the back of my neck can be much more arousing and can be that signal that, I'm kind of interested in exploring maybe doing something sexual right now. And gives me the opportunity to feel what's happening in my body and go along with it or not, based on what my mood is. Okay, I have one more quote to do, but I wanted to check in with you and see if you had anything more to say about erogenous zones.
I am complete.
Okay. So there's one erogenous zone that we haven't touched on, and I'm going to actually quote Raquel Welch here. The mind can also be an erogenous zone. And that's what you're accessing when you're reading erotica or watching porn or something like that. You're using your brain, your imagination to create that turn on.
And another way is by simply paying attention, being present, and creating a zone of safety and comfort. That also is activating that mental erogenous zone.
Yes. All right.
Thank you for joining us.
Yep. Today's topic was erogenous zones. If you've got questions, drop them in the comments. Contact us. Our contact information is in the description.
Subscribe.
I was just going to say that.
Hit that subscribe button.
It was my turn to say that. And tune in next week for some more advice from the sexagenarian sages.
Thank you for joining us.